All right, well, let's begin. I am David Moore, the Executive Director of the White House Fellows Foundation and Association. We are the alumni group that support the President's Commission on White House Fellowships on the current class. And there are in all 800 living White House Fellows, dating back to the first class from when the first class was established just after 1964. And so tonight we're going to provide a webinar on demystifying the written application. I'm joined today by Wes Hallman, and go ahead and wave your hand. There's Wes served in the Bush 43 administration. Nadine Gracia and Ted Johnson both served in the Obama administration, and Lyndon Dahlkemper and Kyle Shearer were with me, actually served during a transition year, the first half during the Obama administration and the second half of their year in the Trump administration. I was a fellow about 25 years ago and served in the Clinton administration. Now, so with that background, I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to talk and give their advice about the written application. For those of you who are watching the webinar, we have 1,200 of you signed up. You can pose questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer as many of them as we can. But I want you to know we have developed a frequently asked questions sheet that all of you have access to right now. And these address some of the most common questions. And just looked through the chat a moment ago, I can see 5 or 6 of them that are addressed in those FAQs. And so I'm going to steer you to those if it's a fairly routine answer. Jen, would you be so kind as to call that graphic up? We'll show you the FAQs here. There you go. If you go to our homepage, WHFF.org, and just scroll down to the bottom of the page, you can click on FAQs, and you can see we've got about 30 of them there. The first 19 directly parallel those that are on the whitehouse.gov website. We've added a few more, about 14 additional frequently asked questions that are based on some of the things that came up during a webinar earlier this year. So as you ask questions, if these have already been addressed in the FAQs, we're going to steer you there so we can save time. I also want to encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn. Jen, if you could scroll down, thank you so much. We are the White House Fellows Foundation and Association. Please follow us, and we'll provide you regular updates on the program and the process that way. All right, Jen, you can go ahead and hide that now if you'd be so kind. All right, on our discussion tonight, we're going to focus on the written application. I realize you may have questions about the process, and it is quite a long and involved one. It involves interviews and, of course, placements at government agencies for those who are selected. But that all comes later. The first and biggest challenge you're facing right now is the written application. And so that's where we're going to focus our remarks. We'll spend about our first 45 minutes sharing our thoughts, advice, guidance, and lessons learned, having gone through the process, and then we will open it up to your questions at the end. As we go, we'll address as many of those questions as we can, point you to the FAQs if necessary, and otherwise try to come back to them at the end. So with that, let me just say that the written application is quite intensive, quite involved, as you've probably already seen if you've registered and begun the process. It involves several essay questions that are the heart of the application, in addition to all of the other elements that you would have to do, like letters of recommendation and an employment history. So I recommend that you get started on it as soon as you can. The application is due on January 5th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, no later than that. And it is entirely online. I spent about 30 days working on my application. That's not to say all day, every day, but for a month, I spent an hour here, an hour there, working on it, trying to get it as polished and precise as I possibly could. And so I recommend that level of sort of attention to detail as you're going through and preparing that. So with that, Nadine, let me start with you. What advice do you have about preparing for the written applications, writing the essays? What would you recommend to our folks on the webinar tonight?
Sure. Thank you, David. And hello, everyone. It's great to see the level of interest that we have. Thank you so much for being so interested in the White House Fellows Program, whether you're interested in applying now, applying in the future, or if you're in a position where you know of potential candidates to learn more about the program and specifically about the application. Again, my name is Nadine Gracia. I was in the class of 08-09, so I too was in a transition year class. I started in the Bush administration and completed my fellowship in the Obama administration. It was truly a transformational experience, and so I'm glad there's so much interest. I'm going to reiterate one of the points that David shared in his great advice, which is, if you are applying in particular in this cycle, really to start early and start now, to just even begin thinking about looking at the application and what the content entails and starting to think about how you'll approach responses to the essays, several drafts that can be written, ideas that you can really reflect on to prepare the application and not waiting until the last minute to put it together. Because I think one of the things and pieces of advice that I would share is, as best as possible, is really trying to have the application tell the story of you. It's on paper and you're trying to really convey a lifetime of work, accomplishment, achievement, passions, interests, service, and commitment. And so what are some of the key messages that you'd like to shine through in a written application that those who are reading them can really start to begin to understand who you are and what drives you. I'll say in particular around some of the areas that you'll complete, for example, around the civic and engagements and the voluntary activities. As we share in the FAQs, really focus on those that are major activities that have significance and impact and commitment. Examples where you're demonstrating leadership. It's not intended to be a laundry list. Sometimes there are one-time significant activities, but it's not intended to be a laundry list of effort and work, but really to show and demonstrate where you've had some major engagement and activity. And to know that anything that you put on the application it's going to be reviewed. And if you are indeed selected, you could be asked about it, have a conversation about it. So when you're preparing your application and what you're putting into your application, ensure that that's information that you're ready to talk about, reflect on, and that truly embodies and exemplifies who you are. I know that Kyle's going to talk a little bit about the letters of recommendation, so I won't go into that in particular. But with regards to the essays, your quality of writing and the substance of what you're writing matters, because that's going to be also a key function of a future White House fellow. And so it's really spending the time. You heard David talk about how long he spent in developing his application, really thinking about that content and substance and writing well. And communicating exactly who you are and what you hope to accomplish. And within those essays, really giving thought to, what your lifetime goals are, why you want to be a fellow there. It's tempting to kind of simply reiterate what the program is about, but really think about what it means to you so that those who are reading your application really understand why this is such a unique opportunity that you hope to participate in and be a part of. So I'll stop there and happy to answer additional questions and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Nadine. Oh, so you mentioned Kyle and the letters of recommendation. So Kyle, I should turn to you. What do you recommend in terms of the letters of recommendation that people need to be putting forward? Some do's and don'ts and pitfalls, things to look out for.
Sure. So thanks, David, for organizing this webinar. As mentioned, my name is Kyle. I'm originally from Dover, Ohio, and I was a member of the transition year 2016-2017. I was placed at the Department of Justice. So you're required to submit 3 letters of recommendation, which shouldn't exceed 2 pages in length. And the application form asks that these letters of recommendation come from individuals who know you well. It suggests that one recommendation be from an individual who can speak to your professional competence and accomplishments, and one recommendation from someone with knowledge of your community and civic activities. The form sort of then requests or suggests that one of those recommendations or third recommendation should be from your current supervisor, though a prior supervisor is acceptable. And I think that following that suggested approach does allow the commission, who ultimately selects White House fellows, the best picture of who you are. And I think, sort of just personalizing it, I was an attorney working in a law firm, and I tried to follow that advice. So I had one recommendation come from the Attorney General of the Navajo Nation. I had spent some time out there, and I'm Native American, so she was able to speak to some of those sort of cultural identity issues and the work that I had done in that field. I had another recommender was an officer in the Air Force who I served with in Iraq. He was my supervisor there. So that presented sort of a different side of who I was. And then the final recommendation came from my supervisor at the firm that I was at, who was able to talk about sort of my work as an attorney. So that's how I handled it. And I think, I generally followed the application's advice, and I think that's that serves you reasonably well. So that's what I have for now. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Kyle. I would just offer on letters of recommendation, there is one thing that is the kiss of death. If you're reading a letter of recommendation and you see a paragraph that describes what you've done, and then you get to the next letter and you see exactly the same paragraph, that tells the reader that, you wrote a paragraph, provided it to them, and they just took it and put it in a letter. That's not what you want. You want someone to really describe their understanding of you. I would also say it's more important to get someone who knows you than someone who necessarily has a big title, who may have only met you once or twice, but they're way up the food chain in your organization. That may look great, on the letterhead, but it may not be someone who knows you and can best articulate their appreciation of your skills. So I would offer that. Let's talk a little bit about the essays. Lyndon, I think the most complex of the essays is the memorandum to the president. Could you talk about that a little bit, both why we ask people to write that and what advice you have for putting it together?
Absolutely. Like Nadine said, a lot of the application is the story of you. So many of the questions on the application are very evident what you should be writing about. It requires a little bit of soul searching and thinking about what really makes you tick. But I think that the policy proposal is kind of an issue for some people, especially those who haven't worked in DC, who don't come from like a policy background. One of my biggest pieces of advice for this is to write about something you know. You don't want to be doing a ton of external research, right? Completely delving into a new policy area that you don't have any experience in. I'm not saying you need to be an expert in this area, but it'll be evident when you write the policy proposal that you're coming from a place of expertise. It should also be something presidential in nature. And what I mean by that is it shouldn't be something that could be solved by a lower level government worker within a particular agency, right, who has control over it. And if it's really in Congress's role, the president can propose things like that. That could possibly fit the bill. But think about what is the president really responsible for? An easy way to do that is to think that it crosses agencies or particularly cabinet secretaries. So my policy proposal, and so the last thing I'll say is people go very different places with this. You can go very broad. This is a policy that's going to cross all of government and have very broad reaching effects, right? A brand new program or something that's addressing an issue in America that's happening at the time. Mine was much more micro, and you can go either way, and you could have 10, 20 different White House fellows, and they'll have very different approaches to this policy proposal. Mine really threw some people for a loop because I'm a Coast Guard officer who had been involved in narcotics interdiction. So I wrote about rescheduling marijuana from a Schedule I drug to a lower schedule. It was very specific, but it involved multiple government agencies in multiple under multiple cabinet secretaries. And it was a great conversation starter when I got further along in the process because everyone wanted to know why this was the policy that I chose. Well, I had researched it and had been something I had been involved with operationally. I had very specific reasons for choosing it, and it wouldn't have been something that you would necessarily like aligned with my career. So I think it was a really good choice for me. But you have to find what the best choice for you is. It will come up in your interviews later if those come up, or if you get to the interview process. But write about something that you're interested in. Think about like, what is the problem that you think should be solved in America? And then find a way to tackle that and connect it to somewhere in your expertise, whether you're from the business community, whether you're from the science community, whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, a military officer. That would be my biggest advice. Find something that you're passionate about.
Thanks, Lyndon. I would echo a couple of points that she made, and I think I actually encourage people when they write a policy memo to pick something that's going to surprise the people who are reading your application. Just as Lyndon described, she said, wait a minute, why would this issue, be coming from this person? I think the policy memo is the one place where you have a great opportunity to show sort of the breadth of your understanding of the world. And so I would say what you want to avoid, to my mind, is coming across as a one-trick pony. If you are a medical doctor who writes, has great deep expertise in a particular area, but you then choose to write about a medical policy, a reader could get the impression that you understand medicine in great depth, but you might not have a breadth of understanding. And so the policy memo is one opportunity where you can show that breadth of expertise. A couple of other points about it. I recommend whatever your recommendation is, put it in the first sentence. Don't hide it. Don't bury it, halfway through, expecting the reader to find it. Don't build to the end. And you only have 500 words. And why is that? Because you have to be able to articulate a position and a convincing argument in a very short amount of space. And if selected as a White House Fellow, you will be advising a senior official with just that kind of precision and economy of words. And so it's important to both put your recommendation forward, talk about why it hasn't been done before. What are the obstacles? What are the costs involved? Are there constituents you have to win over? Is there a monetary cost, a political cost, whatever it might be? And back to Lyndon's point about make it presidential, I think that's one of the most common mistakes people have, is they pick something that could be addressed by a cabinet secretary. So find something, and it's really easy to tell what's on the president's plate. Just open the newspaper and you can see the kinds of issues that the president is dealing with on a daily basis. All right, with that, Ted, let me go to you. The written application, what do you think are the most important areas for folks to focus on? What advice would you give?
Yeah, thanks for this. And it's good to be here. I'm Ted Johnson. I was in the class of 2011, 2012 when I was a lieutenant commander, interim commander in the United States Navy. I was placed at the Department of Energy with the Deputy Secretary of Energy, who was also himself a former White House Fellow, Dan Poneman. And so, look, it's going to sound a little repetitive because story matters so much, but I'm going to tell it to you in the way it was told to me. Right after I'd sort of written a draft of my essays, I reached out to the sort of Navy brethren of current and former fellows and just was looking for some advice on whether I had done it right or not. I was looking for the formula to win. And I'm sure a lot of you are sort of tuned in looking for like, oh, okay, here are the little secrets that are going to help me piece together a winning formula for being selected. No such thing exists. And so I connected with a Navy guy, and he said, look, man, just give me sort of rundown of who you are, what you do, and like why you want to do this. And I did what we're used to doing, which is running down my professional accomplishments. Here's where I went to school. Here's all the accolades and awards I got in my profession. And he's like, yeah, that's the baseline. Everyone who's applying can say the same thing about their career path. That's why they're applying. They're exceptional in their career path. They did, they went to interesting schools and did very cool things. So you've met the baseline. So what's your differentiating factor? What is when fellows are sitting in a room on a Saturday afternoon reading package after package after package, at the end of the day, why will they remember you? It's not going to be because of the schools you went to. People went to better schools than you. It's not going to be because of your resume or the recommendation letters. Everyone's going to say glowing things. And the thing to walk away with was the advice to me was the story, but not like the sob story or the thing that's going to make people feel sorry for you or sort of pull on the emotional analysis or the emotional component of their analysis. Instead, it's the narrative. Like each essay, each question should reveal a slightly different part of you. So as David said, you don't come across as a one-trick pony. So if every essay talks about this exceptional medical thing you did, or this case you won, or this really hard time during a deployment, and everything hammers that same point, you walk away as that one-dimensional person with this really incredible experience, but maybe not more than that. And so using each of the essays, the memos, even your recommendation letters, who you ask to recommend should paint a more comprehensive picture of who you are, so that at the end of the day, your name means something to the folks who have read it, the many people who will read your application, and they have a sense of who you are. And so, for an example, my essays and memo and all that stuff, a little bit about work. I was a cyber warfare nerd in the Navy. So that's, all my resume stuff showed that. But I use my policy memo on homeschooling because we're a military family. We moved a lot. And so we decided to homeschool our boys to give them some consistency. And so I talked about, DOD/Department of Education, et cetera, there. Instead of talking about professional accomplishment, was about humanitarian assistance, to show that military folks are not just warfare centric, that there's many things that folks do in the military that also look a lot like community service at the local level, but that are happening in other countries after typhoons or whatever. So this is sort of a rambly way of saying that you are putting together, you're sort of laying out puzzle pieces in your essays in hopes that once the person finishes the whole package, these pieces have assembled into a picture that stays with your name and the impression that you leave with the readers through the process. And if you can achieve that, even if you don't get selected, it will be tremendously beneficial to you personally and professionally. But in the event you do make it to the next round, you actually have a ton of interview questions and responses to that the commissioners can pull from as they look at your package. And again, that allows you to build out a fuller picture of who you are as a person and not just as an accomplished professional and community servant. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ted. Appreciate it. I think the advice about you want to come across as a flesh and blood person, not just a resume, is so important. That's as Ted mentioned, there will be many applications that the readers are going through, and you want to say something that makes the reader say, wow, I really want to meet this person. I really want to talk to them. I want to have them in, so your written application is step one in the process, and it's to try to get you to the next round, which is the regional interviews that will happen in February, about a month after you've submitted your applications. So with that, Wes, let me turn to you on the essays, lifetime goals. Seems to me that's in some ways the most introspective of the essays, and not something we're often asked to do. How would you recommend approaching that?
Now that's a tremendous question, and thanks for allowing me the opportunity to be involved in this and give back to this fellowship that's meant so much to everybody on here. First off, I think Ted and everybody's hit it on the nose that what we want to get out of this as readers, as folks that are looking at who's going to be in the next class, because we do want to see that person, we do want to see a coherence in there. And what I found with the application is really ended up being quite a self-examination. One of the folks I was working with that was helping me with the process actually told me to stop and just think very, very hard of what drives me personally, what motivates me, what is it in this life that is the theme of where I want to be and what do I want to do. And that's how I approached the essay on goals as well. And what I came after deep reflection was essentially two words. I love service. For those of you who don't know, I was 27 years active duty Air Force. I absolutely love service, but it's service for something, some greater good. And so it was impact. So when I thought about what were the goals that I had, and I looked ahead at whether I got the fellowship or not. Now the fellowship, one of the questions in there is, how did you talk about the why? I think the why and the goals should dovetail together, but one shouldn't necessarily be dependent on the other. So when you look at the goals, White House Fellowship can serve to those goals, but it doesn't necessarily have to. Your entire life depends on this one cornerstone being at the base of whatever it is that you want to do. So the goal should, again, like Ted talked about, it should be part of that coherence of the story that you're telling about you. So don't come up with a goal that you think that a reader would want to hear, that you want to be the next president of the United States. If that's not the story that comes out of your greater application, then it's going to come across as artificial. So it should be sort of a logical step. So for me, it was I wanted to get into a position where I could have greater impact on my airman life, in a higher rank or higher position or whatever. And ultimately, it was about our nation's defense. And so when you looked at my goals, they kind of followed that theme of service and impact, but it was in something that I was expert in. And then going back to the why, how would the fellowship inform and build on who I am in service of those goals, et cetera. So this was a long-winded answer to say it should follow that theme of your greater application and that story of you. So like Dave says, it's a wow, but it's not a wow in great surprise, like there's a juxtaposition between your goals and what the rest of the application says. It's a wow is like, this person really is on this road to that. And we think that this fellowship could serve in that capacity, and they could be part of a greater cohort that is also building towards some greater good that is encompassed by your goals. So again, make sure that it's thematically with the rest of it. So something that was said previous that I think is absolutely vital is that when you do get to those regional or national finals, that the person that sits in front of those people asking those questions is the same person they read about in your application, because it becomes extremely obvious in just the first few minutes if there's a mismatch between what's on paper that person they wanted to meet is actually not the person in front of them asking the questions. So thanks for that opportunity to be long-winded.
Thanks, Wes. Appreciate it. So the question of, you mentioned why you want to be a White House Fellow, and that's one of the essay questions, of course, and it's sometimes a tricky one to answer. And I hear from a lot of people who say, well, I don't want to come across too strong, but I also don't want to, sound like I'm, have to be the next president, and this is one step along the way. So what's a nice way to thread that needle? Nadine, have you got any advice on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll share some experience of my story of why I trained as a physician. I was early in my clinical practice. I had heard about the White House Fellows Program years prior to that when I was in medical school. And throughout my education, from as long as I can remember in my youth growing up in my hometown, I had always really had an interest in maybe not knowing how to articulate it, but really addressing policy issues and broader systemic issues to ensure that that everyone has opportunity to thrive in our nation and around the world. And so as I was engaging in that work, I knew that I was potentially going to have a blend with regards to my career of clinical practice and policy. And after being in practice for some years, remember the advice from my mentor around this opportunity of the White House Fellows Program, because I'm also a student of leadership and giving back and service. And that this would be really a tremendous opportunity to see leadership at the highest levels and to understand certainly how the government operates and connect that then to some of the longer term goals that I would have really to have impact for community, however you define community. And I was at a transition point where I could really pursue a career in academia, my clinical practice, and the research I was doing specifically in youth violence, or pursue this other route of thinking about leadership and policy. And so applied for the White House Fellows and articulated my why as this being an opportunity to give me that exposure to understanding how do leaders tackle these issues, when you think about it from a national perspective, and then how does that then impact communities, and that was not going to be an experience that I would have in the work setting and in the current career path that I was on, and that this could actually potentially help to define the directions that I would take in my career. And so having that experience, and I saw there was a question specifically to me, I think all of the panelists can answer this, as far as how did then the fellowship change my career trajectory. What it did for me is it solidified my interest to move into this space of really thinking about broader systems, policy areas. And so it catalyzed and accelerated my transition. And I went from then clinical practice and that research world more into the policy realm, and now work in policy, specifically around health policy, and continue that in government and now in the nonprofit sector. So the why I was articulating was trying to really narrow in on the experience that I wouldn't otherwise have but for the White House Fellows Program, and the fact that you would have this early in your career to then be able to really shape the next steps that you would take in your career. That was how I defined the why in my application.
Thanks, Nadine. Appreciate it. Lyndon, how did you approach that question? Is there a why that you think was particularly resonant when you went through this process?
Sure, David. And I mean, applying for the fellowship, I think itself was very helpful for me to understand why I did the things I did. I'm going to cover a couple of things here. I was one of the younger fellows in my class. I was still in my 20s. I would say the majority of the fellows nowadays tend to be in their 30s, but we have some in their 40s, some in their 20s. And I was a little junior when it came to military fellows as well. I was only in 03. But for me, I had been, as I said, involved in counter-narcotics operations in the Coast Guard, and I was living in California, a state where you could get marijuana down the street. And this seems anachronistic in today's day and age. But I was just like, why are we doing the things we're doing, right? I'm executing orders, trying to do the best that I can do out here on the water. And then I went to public policy grad school, where I got to explore things from an academic perspective. And so for me, when I heard about the fellowship, and I actually heard about someone was talking to cadets that I was leading at the time, and I was like, this actually is more in my age range, my part of my career. And to me, it was an opportunity to see how decisions are being made at that highest level to make what I was doing at an operational level, a strategic level, tactical level in the military make more sense, or figure out, how you can impact and change things. And I've seen it as I've moved. I'm still in the Coast Guard. I think it will vastly impact my career outside the Coast Guard, but I have seen it impact how I operate as an operator. I've been a commanding officer twice since then. I worked in the U.S. Embassy, which I may not have done if it wasn't for the fellowship, honestly. But trying to understand different parts of the U.S. government and the way that we make policy and how leaders think about it, which I think Nadine talked a little bit about, I think has changed the way that I think as a leader in my own organization, even at the level that I was at and that I continue to kind of move up the organization. So different people have different times of their career that they think about the fellowship. And there may be different times that it's better or worse for others, but I think it really, for each one of us, adds something to wherever we are in our career. For some people, it's a complete career change. For some of it, it simply enhances the path that we're already on.
Thanks, Lyndon. Kyle, can you talk a little bit about what perspective you've gained as a result of the fellowship going out into the next chapter beyond? I think a lot of people have, and this gets away a little bit from the written application, but a lot of the questions are, well, how did this, how did the fellowship sort of change your career trajectory? So let's maybe take a minute to talk about that and be interested to hear others as well.
Sure. So I think the White House Fellowship is really unique because, at the end of the day, it's a nonpartisan fellowship program, and it is an opportunity for folks from lots of different parties to sort of be parachuted into fairly senior positions within government, whether that's working, at the White House or directly for a cabinet official. And, at the time, I wasn't even registered with a political party at the time. And, very shortly after, I was, asked to, sort of stay on in the administration in a really incredible role. And that certainly would not have happened but for the White House Fellowship. I mean, I was not someone that was taking time off of work to join a campaign or anything like that. But through, this nonpartisan program, there was a level of sort of meritocracy and the ability to show a value add across administrations, right? And I was in the Indian law space, and Indian law tends to be nonpartisan relative to other areas of government, and that was the work that I did at the Department of the Interior, was sort of supervising or providing oversight or supervision to sort of the Indian law components of the Justice Department, but also the Office of Tribal Justice and the Office of Justice Programs as it related to grant-making activities. And sort of the experience and the crossover was really valued from one administration to the next. I think as a practitioner of federal Indian law, just being in the government was in and of itself incredibly helpful, right? I mean, you can try cases in tribal court or think about Native American issues, living on a reservation, and that lived experience is incredibly helpful, right? But to sort of see how policymakers think about these issues, or to see how the Justice Department considers affirmative cases when they're going to bring a case on behalf of a tribe, or thinks about the positions they're going to take in front of the Supreme Court, even if they're not a party. Those are really tremendously valuable experiences. And even just getting to know what levers to pull, who are the decision makers. I mean, even it's so common just in the Indian law practice for attorneys or tribal officials to want to meet with the Secretary of the Interior, when in reality, almost for every decision, it's actually, it's the Assistant Secretary of this or the Director of this particular program. And, knowing who those people are and how the building works has been incredibly helpful as a partner at a law firm now. So.
Thanks, Kyle. Ted, what was the best advice you got in terms of getting ready to write your application?
Yeah, I kind of answered that one. I mean, it was the puzzle piecing together of the bits. And so maybe I can sort of build on that by picking up on this question of why. I'll tell you that I went in to the fellowship or to the application process hoping to one day be national security advisor. I think Colin Powell was the first uniformed officer to be national security advisor. I believe that's right. And I kind of I thought that would be pretty cool. It's a great job outside of the traditional pathways. And so that was sort of what I, hope to learn in the fellowship, not the job, but the exposure to people at these levels of decision making and how they work on Tuesday afternoon. Not what I see on TV, not in the State of the Unions, but like on Tuesday afternoon on a, in the middle of a non-election year, or, in a month where Congress is out of session, what's happening in government? Like, how are decisions being made? What are the conversations like? What are the debates? Do the backbenchers speak up? Like, I just wanted to be exposed to what happens behind the curtain of DC. And then I'll be a little petty as well, because a little part of me wanted to be a fellow because there were folks that I served with that didn't think I could. And I just want to say, like, we're still like applicants. Our resumes on the White House, press release may make us sound like we're golden children. We're regular folks, and I was in an assignment with the Navy that I didn't think really set me up for the path that I wanted to be on. And this was sort of a little poke in the eye to those that didn't think I could do it. I said, I'll give this a shot, try to make it, and if it happens, this will be cool. The last thing I'll say is going into the fellowship wanting to, like, I want to accomplish the following 3 things and have your checklist ready is the wrong way to go about it. You should be like really open to the application should show your openness to new experiences, because chances are, if it all works out, you're going to end up somewhere unrelated to the work that you do in your daily life. So that kind of general curiosity is good. But thinking about life in the 3 to 5 year chunks is how I left the fellowship. Instead of trying to picture where I wanted to be in 20 years and then map myself back 20 years and to see what the steps I need to take each year, where do I want to be in 3 years, 5 years? And what do I have to do today to get there? And I'll tell you, by the end of the fellowship, I wanted to be a writer and not the national security advisor anymore, which is, a whole other set of conversations. But I sort of came to this discovery while we were at a White House Fellows event with Judy Woodruff, who was, at the time an anchor. And just this summer, I did a thing with Judy Woodruff in like my writing world now. So not only does the fellowship sort of expose you to the things you hope to learn, and ideally set you up for the kind of career that you want to have in the life you're living, but it also exposes you to other things that may cause you to change your trajectory altogether. And I retired right at the 20-year mark and set off on this new path of writer scholar kind of thing because of the White House Fellowship, and not in spite of it. And that was something I did not anticipate, but certainly satisfied the why I applied in the first place. It just turns out I want to learn to talk to the public about hard stuff instead of being in the rooms making those decisions. But all of these things sort of build towards the kind of democracy and the kind of country that we want to have. And the fellowship really exposes you to the wealth of people and ideas and experiences that the nation has to offer for folks that want to serve it in one way or another.
Thanks, Ted. Turning to some of the questions we've gotten in from folks on the line tonight. One asks, how will our policy brief be evaluated if it happens to be out of date between the time our application is reviewed and the time it's written? I'm interested in making a proposal related to AI. Well, I think what's most important is the argument that you make and how you show and illustrate your ability to convince a senior official, to show a breadth of your understanding of the issue that you're writing about, and sort of the political costs and issues that may be involved in implementing that recommendation. Obviously, the world is dynamic and things change. If you were you can look at the Middle East right now and see, in the course of a month, how much has changed. And if you'd been writing about something in November and December, and by the time, you get to an interview in, April, obviously the world can change. But ultimately, I think the people who are evaluating will be looking at the strength of your argument and will be asking you about that. And I also think most of the questions in the interview, or not most, a great many of the questions during the interview process will come back to your policy memo, because ultimately what the interviews and the written application are striving to identify are people who can serve as White House Fellows, serving very high level officials in government, whether it's in a cabinet or an agency or in the White House, but potentially anywhere across the executive branch. We have in the current class right now, we have one fellow serving at the CIA. We have others at the different agencies. We have one, several in the White House itself. So you want to be sure in your written application that you are demonstrating the ability to think at that level and express and make cogent arguments at that level for senior officials. So hopefully that answers. Yeah, Wes, do you want to add something there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something on the policy memo that I don't think has fully come out yet. You do have to use an economy of words here, because you don't have a lot of space, and you're going to want to wax poetic about that really builds on your expertise. But do leave space there to consider the views of others, because at this level, a president's going to want to know what opposition there is to this, why that opposition is there, and why your problem solves whatever it is that opposition would be bringing up. And that demonstrates your ability to put yourselves empathetically and intellectually in somebody else's shoes and be able to argue the other side of the story, because you will be, one of the questions that invariably comes up is, okay, we decided to go the other way. Argue why we shouldn't choose your policy and why we should go another way. And having already thought through that and put some of those thoughts in your policy memo will help you with this, and also give you a more fulsome memo for them to consider when those readers are looking at it. So I just wanted to throw that out there on the policy piece.
Yeah, indeed.
Wes, if I could just quickly say, that's such a great point, because that's actually what you would then do as a White House fellow and a policy official. It's a decision memo, right? And a decision memo has to present multiple sides to an argument so that you can then present what your recommendation is and why. So I think that's critically important. I will also say that yes, things evolve and change, and while we're focusing on the application, that's then the conversation that happens in the regional and the national interviews. That if you've written on an issue and things have evolved, then you may be asked about that evolution and what those current events are, the current policies and decisions that may be discussed, and are you keeping abreast of that issue, which is also another reason why to really understand, what have I written about, and has it changed over time, and am I prepared to have a conversation? Doesn't mean you have to have all the answers, but to have a conversation about how that issue has evolved over time.
Yeah, indeed. So several of us were in transition years, Lyndon and Kyle, Nadine as well, and I was in a transition from Clinton 1 to Clinton 2 my year, and every transition, even in the same administration from first to second, there are significant things that go on. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience was in a transition year? Maybe Nadine, why don't you begin, since you were Bush to Obama, and then Lyndon and Kyle, if you talk about Obama to Trump. What was that experience like?
It was an amazing experience to experience the transition from the Bush administration to the Obama administration. I was placed at Health and Human Services, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, as a fellow. And in that experience, I learned and saw what transition of government means with regards to the actual operations, the need for continuity of government, seeing the role that career civil servants play with regards to that transition of government, and how the new political appointees in the Obama administration were then briefed up on the operations of the agencies, and seeing both the transition from an administration that was looking at the legacy it was setting by ending through the Bush administration, whether it was through program and policy or other decisions that were being made by the administration, to then seeing the on-ramp of a new administration, which sets forth its policy priorities and how those are implemented. So really getting an understanding too of how both political appointees and career civil servants work. It was, I gained an amazing appreciation for the career civil servants with regards to their institutional memory, their knowledge of going through these processes. and then being able to quickly ramp up to a new administration. I will say that in our department, we had a situation where we actually did not have a cabinet secretary confirmed for several months in the beginning of the Obama administration. And so you also saw where career civil servants were serving in acting roles and carrying forth the early priorities of the administration until that new cabinet secretary joined the administration. That was Kathleen Sebelius as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So those are all leadership lessons. You're learning and seeing these operations, but you're also understanding the operations of government and seeing how leaders move through such a time of a transition. So I feel very privileged to have experienced that type of transition. And my roles changed as well with regards to working in the first part, specifically in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, to then in the Obama administration working in the immediate office of the Secretary, and using that prior experience in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health to actually be of support and help to the incoming administration. At first, you're kind of running around trying to offer help in any way that you can. But if you really spend that time, specifically early on in the fellowship, of really understanding the organizational structure of the agency, understanding who the various offices are, the people that work there, you can then really become an asset. But being persistent in that approach to really be a resource and source of support.
And sometimes when the new administration comes in, the White House fellow is the only person in the senior suite that's still there. Everybody else has been, has left. So that can be very interesting too. Lyndon and Kyle, what was your experience like going from the Obama to the Trump administration?
Sure, I'll jump in. Also an incredibly interesting experience. I actually was working at GSA on the presidential transition team. So when Nadine said about supporting the transition and trying to help make it effective, really resonates with me. And we often talk about the political appointees we worked with, but the everyday GS, SES workers that I worked with were some of the people that I learned the most leadership lessons from. And they spanned through the administrations. I had an up close and personal view to everything that goes into trying to transition from one government to another from an operational perspective in particular. But I will say, someone else mentioned sort of a question about politics and things like that. Some of the questions that came up in my year were, are you willing to support whatever administration comes in? If the answer to that is no, then this may not be the fellowship for you. And I know it's a transition year next year, right? Whether or not, Biden stays on or another Democrat or the Republicans win, right? It's a nonpartisan program. And so rather than just saying yes, you need to really believe that, because the new administration comes in and trying to be as helpful and supportive as Nadine said, but also learning from how we're either changing policies or having different priorities. So I'll just speak a little bit about our class. A lot of people stayed in the same position. Almost everyone had changes to their position in some way, what we were doing, what we were working on. Some people moved within their organization, and some people moved organizations, and there were different reasons for that. It also impacted our fellowship a little. We had many empty high-level secretary and other positions not confirmed in the early days of the administration. But I would say that also there were opportunities there. So the education component of the fellowship includes getting to sit down for an hour with very senior government officials, members of the administration, but also people who are in Congress or Supreme Court justices or others. But when we had a dearth of some of those personnel and the administration was getting their feet under them, we had a lot of exposure to the business industry. We got to go to Peloton headquarters before anybody really knew about, or most people knew about Peloton, right? We sat down with Jamie Dimon in New York. We had a lot of amazing conversations with senior leaders in community service that we may not have had if we had senior officials. So I think there were some real opportunities that came up, but it may be more tumultuous or less depending on sort of where you're placed. And the question came up about how placement is determined. You put in your own preferences. and then you interview a host of places. They will say who they're interested in interviewing, and it's sort of a matching process, right? There's some consideration for what you want, but there's also a lot of consideration for what all of the offices want, and there's more offices who would take a fellow than get a fellow that year, so it's sort of like a matching process.
Yeah.
I know Kyle may have some additional input from our transition year.
Yeah. Thanks, Linda.
Sure. So I think being at an agency is first of all, being anywhere during a transition is incredibly interesting, right? As Linda and Nadine mentioned, these are really unique opportunities to sort of see leadership in action, and how different administrations and different leaders approach critical issues. And because, as Nadine mentioned, she had her experience with the Bush administration thinking about its legacy, there's so much that happens at the end of an administration. There were so many things that we were working on, racing to get to the finish line, whether I was in the Associate Attorney General's office, and there were consent decrees where the Justice Department had investigated patterns and practices of unconstitutional conduct by various police departments, and there was a deadline where they wanted to sort of get those in place, or at least announced, whether it was with Baltimore or other communities. Thinking about mortgage-backed security settlements, that was something that the office was working on, and they wanted to finalize before they left. So there's a flurry of activity that you can become a part of, depending on what your interests are, backgrounds are, and sort of where you fit into the structure. And then when the new administration comes in, you can see very different approaches to many of the same issues. The Dakota Access Pipeline issue was something that sort of spanned that transition period, something that really became an issue during our fellowship. And obviously each administration had very different approaches and priorities on how to resolve that issue. So those are just a few of the things, but it's definitely an interesting time. And as David mentioned, I was probably one of only 2, maybe 3 people who was in the Associate Attorney General's office on day one of the new administration, that was also there on the very last day of the prior administration. So
interesting. Thanks, Kyle. I do want to mention or emphasize something Lyndon said a moment ago about you have to be willing to serve in the administration. So if you feel strongly, if you're of a partisan mind that you would only serve in a Democratic administration or only serve in a Republican administration, especially if you're applying in a transition year, I would suggest that may not be the right approach to take. And as Lynn said, it may not be the right fellowship for you. This is a bipartisan, nonpartisan program. Nonpartisan. And I wanted to mention a question that I see here that came in from the audience along these lines. If we have partisan political experience, how should we speak about this in our application, since the fellowship is nonpartisan? Ted or Wes, anyone, would you like to talk about that? How do you address that?
Yeah, I had none. I have nothing to add there, so I'll turn it over to
Yeah, and I think Lyndon kind of put it in there very, very well in the answer, and I wouldn't add much to that. It is who you are, as long as in the great traditions of our nation, be able to treat the other side as you may disagree on some politics, but if you can listen with an open mind and you can engage and et cetera, and you can support things, like in the military, all of us are we may have our political leanings, but we all pledge to be nonpartisan in our support of the Constitution and the Commander-in-Chief. So I think you approach it that same way, that as long as it's not fundamentally illegal, unconstitutional, or et cetera, your job is to carry forth in whatever mission you've been given in your placement. And I think if you can do that with an open mind and be able to do it to the best of your abilities, I think the fellowship is for you. If, as David said, you have hard lines about you know, what the label of the person you're working for, whether it's Democrat, Republican, or other, then I think maybe this isn't for you. You need to be willing to do the business of government, whoever is leading that government.
Yep, indeed. All right. Well, we're approaching the end of the hour, and so what I'd like to do is just take a moment and ask everyone for any final bits of advice that they want to offer for these great Americans who are getting ready to step forward and put in an application for the White House Fellows Program. And I'll just start by saying, write and rewrite and rewrite, and show it to people, show it to your friends, ask them the questions. How does this sound? Does this, make the case? Does this describe me? Don't be shy about your writing, because trust me, if you're putting this application in, people are going to be reading it, and you don't want the first time, for a fallacy in your argument to be discovered there in the review process. Take the time, use friends, loved ones, acquaintances, people you trust, and ask them to take a look at your essays and say, does this make the case? Does this really describe me? How does this come across? That would be my advice. Let's see. We'll go around the horn here. Lyndon, any final thoughts or advice for folks writing their application?
Absolutely. And I was someone had asked about military, and our panel here is a little heavy military, based on our experience. But there's some reasons behind that with the history of the program that I won't go into too long. But the thing I would say is have people outside of your area of expertise review your application. So if you're in business, have someone who's your friend who's in the scientific community. If you're in the scientific community, reach out to your someone you trust who's in a completely different field. For me, it was asking a civilian to review my application, because what David is saying is 100% true. But the people who will review your application are mostly alumni, and they come from a wide variety of backgrounds. Military, sure, but lawyers, doctors, business. I had a rocket scientist in our group, community activists, educators. There's a whole host of different backgrounds and experiences that people bring. And that's one of the best things about the fellowship is exposure to these different backgrounds. So have someone from different backgrounds read your application to make sure that it makes sense to someone who's not from your field.
That's great advice. Thank you. Thank you. And I would also say, you're right, several folks have military experience here, and that's not to imply that you have to have that to be part of the program. My thanks to all of you guys. You were quick to volunteer, and so I appreciate that. Wes, over to you. What advice would, final words, final thoughts you would like to share?
Well, first off, the advice given has been incredible. I would say, besides taking that initial step to do the introspection and think about what story you want to tell, after you've done a few versions of it, do take the time to walk away from it for a couple days. Think about it, and then come back and read it like you're reading it for the first time. And I think that will refreshen what you're doing. And what I find is that I read what I think I wanted to write, and when I come back to it after a few days, then I read what's really on the paper, and it's significantly different than what I thought I'd written. So it helps tighten things up. That's what I would have to say.
Thanks, Wes. Nadine?
Thanks, David. I think my final comments are akin to what Lyndon was describing. While in the early stages, the reading of the applications may be more specialized, where we, are having individuals who have similar backgrounds in the reading. If you're moving forward in the process, that ability to ensure that your application can be understood by individuals who are from different backgrounds, and so also reading such that you're avoiding too much jargon. Every field has its acronyms, it's, the terms that we use in various fields. And it's not to say move completely away from that, but not so much so that, you know, you would need to consult someone to just understand a sentence, because you can't even get past a sentence, and really thinking about, are you communicating this effectively and well, such that a diverse array of people really can understand some of the key points that you're making, key messages that you're sharing. So again, the emphasis on that quality and the substance of writing. Thanks.
Thanks, Nadine. Kyle?
Sure. So maybe I'll give a specific piece of advice and a general piece of advice. So I think on the specific, the first question I was asked about recommendations, please make sure that you're approaching potential recommenders early in the process. You certainly don't want to have a situation where you have spent an incredible amount of time crafting the perfect application, and because someone is a day or two late, it's not considered. So please, please approach those recommenders early. And make sure that they're making progress to meet deadlines. And then the second piece of advice, I would say, there's no sort of ideal way to approach the application, but I think hearing from folks who have done the fellowship, alumni, we have a lot of webinars, and it's really democratized the process in a lot of ways. When we applied, none of these resources were available, and it was very much, someone at my firm used to be a White House fellow, or I had, someone who I knew's cousin was a White House fellow and they approached me. So, hearing just all of these experiences and how individuals have come to the program and how they've approached their own applications, I think is a tremendous benefit, and one that I wish I had. And there are, 5, 6, 7 of these online at this point. So I would encourage you to take a look.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it. Ted, bring us home.
Yeah, I would just say, look, don't try to game the system. Don't try to decipher the formula for selection. It just doesn't exist. The commission's a little bit different usually each year. The folks who are reading are former fellows, so we've kind of seen it all. So just be yourself. So there's no guaranteed way to win the thing, but there are some definite things you can do to eliminate yourself, like bad writing, misspellings, lack of rigor in your responses, presenting yourself to be very one-dimensional, very sort of superficial. So if you just put your stamp on it, the best stamp you have on the package, that is, you have done the absolute only thing you can do, which is to put your best foot forward. If anything else you could have done to tweak your thing to help you get through selection would probably end up in you getting eliminated in the next round, because as it's been said, the person in front of the people doing the interview will not look like the person that's on that page. So just put yourself on the page, and then let the rest take care of itself. Thanks,
Ted. So I'll just close out by talking a little bit about the way ahead. You've got you've got several weeks, about a month and a half or so, a little more, to finish your application and put it in. The applications will all be read in February, and from that, the President's Commission will select about 100 or so regional finalists, and they will be interviewed in groups around the country. And then from that group, it will be whittled down to 30 national finalists, and they will be interviewed in June. And then from that group, a class of White House fellows for next year will be selected. And then they will, once selected, they will come back to Washington, D.C. in July for placement interviews at the various agencies, departments, and in the White House. It's a long process, and so it's going to take time. This is the first step, and in some ways it's the most important step, because if you don't get past this one, you don't have an opportunity for the next step. So I encourage you to put your very best into the application. If you have technical questions about am I eligible to apply or not, you can write the White House Fellows Office, and they can adjudicate those things. Particularly, their email is White House Fellows, all together, lowercase, White House Fellows at who.eop.gov. And I would also again, encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn, White House Fellows Foundation and Association, And finally, if you look at our website, WHFF.org, we have tried to put as much information there for you to explain the process, explain the program, explain all of the interviews. So take the time to look through there. If you haven't already, I think it'll address a lot of your questions, both about the written application and the interviews that will be following later down the road. And so with that, I hope what comes across is our enthusiasm and love for this program. And we're so glad that you are applying. So with that, good night, everyone.